In this week's parasha, Parashat Shelach, at the very end of the parasha, in the maftir, we close off with the mitzvah of Tzitzit, the third paragraph of the Kriyat Shema, the mitzvah of taking a four-cornered garment, taking a talit, the beged, the clothing, and we add the white strings, the Tekhelet string, and we add it to the tzitziot. We add the strings, the chutim, to the beged, and we have ourselves the mitzvah of the Tzitzit, which Chazal tells is shakul, it's equal to all of the other mitzvot. So I heard a couple of shiurim about the unbelievable origin of this mitzvah of Tzitzit from my Rebbe, Rav Eitan Feiner. He takes us back earlier in the Torah to some of the hints and some of the remazim of where the mitzvah of Tzitzit really comes from. Okay, so if we go all the way back to Parashat Noach, after the great flood, the Mabul that destroyed the entire world, and only Noach and his family were saved, we have ourselves Noach coming off the boat, a little bit of a PTSD Noach, and at one point he plants a vineyard. And he gets drunk and ultimately ends up naked in his tent. And we have like a terrible story that takes place. Says the Torah, says God, Vayahel Noach ish adama vayita karem. And after the whole story of the flood, Noach, who's the guy that works the ground, he plants a karem, he plants a kerem, a vineyard. Vayesh min hayayin, and he drinks from the wine. Vayishkar, and he gets drunk. Vayitgal betoch ohalo, and he became uncovered within his tent. He was naked. Vayar Cham avi Canaan et ervat aviv. Vayaged lishnei ahav bachutz, and his son Cham, the father of Canaan, sees his father's nakedness, and he tells his two brothers outside. It says Cham Vayar, he sees. Chazal tell us that this Vayar, this is seeing. We're going to get back to the language of Re'iyah, of seeing a lot in this Dvar Torah, but his seeing right now is a euphemism for different types of sin, even relating it to sexual immorality. This is Gilui Arayot in the euphemistic sense, even though he's seeing a naked father right now, but it sounds like he did much worse over here. So we have ourselves the sin of Cham with his naked father. But then Vayikach Shem Vayefet the Simla, but the other two sons, Shem and Yefet, they take the clothing, the Simla, Vayasimu al shechem shneihem vayilchu aharonit, and they place it on their backs. They walk backwards so that they won't see their father's the nakedness. There's a kavod for their father. Vaychasu et ervat avihem, and they cover their father's nakedness. Ufneihem aharonit ve'ervat avihem lo ra'u, and they did not see their father's nakedness because they looked the other way. They cover their father up. Okay, so Ham messes up big time. Chazal tells us that Ham is a language of hot. It's a language of heat, of passion, of ta'ava, of desire. He messes up with the erva. He messes up with the sexual immorality. He falls to the exact same sins that led to the destruction of his generation, of the flood of the Mabul right before. He's the sins of the ta'ava, of Gilui Arayot. That was Ham. But Shem and Yefet, they clothe their father. Now comes along Rashi, and Rashi says that he notes that while both Shem and Yefet were involved in this mitzvah of Kibud Avayim, they weren't on the exact same level in how they performed. It says Rashi, it says Vayikach Shem Vayefet. Shem and Yefet took the simla, they took the clothing. Ein kativ veichu. It doesn't say, and they took. Ella vayikach, but it says literally, and he took in the singular, but it was two of them. So why does it say it only in the singular of vayikach instead of vayichu? Limed al Shem shnit ametz b'mitzvah yoter miyefet. This teaches us that Shem devoted himself much more. He was a lot more eager. He was mitametz chazak ve'ematz. He had a lot more effort he put into to do the mitzvah more than his brother Yefet did. Lekach zachu banav talit shel tzitzit, and that's why his sons were zochet to the talit of tzitzit. That's it. The talit now is the zechut of Shem. He merits the talit in the future. The Yefet zachalik k'vura lebanav. Now Yefet also did a mitzvah, maybe not as excitedly as Shem was originally, but he also gets a zechut, he also gets a merit, and he gets the privilege of being buried. He has the privilege of k'vura, that the physical body gets covered up. Shneimar eten lagog makom sham kever, as it says that after the end of the days, after the war of Gog Magog, he's going to have a place of burial in the land of Israel. Okay, so according to the Midrash, Shem put in the extra effort. She nit ametz, so he was zochet to the talit of the tzitzit, the mitzvah clothing that covers our bodies, the spiritual mitzvah clothing. So the mitzvah of Shem is the first hint to our root, our source of our mitzvah tzitzit, while Yefet receives the zechut of burial to cover the physical body up after death. Okay, so Rav Feiner explains that the difference between the two of them, the two zechuyot, the burial versus the tzitzit, is actually hinted to in their names. Okay, how is it hinted to in their names? So Shem actually literally means name. Shem, the name connotes the essence of the person. You learn about a person from the Shem. They say that when a parent names their kid, there's a kind of like a ruach hakodesh involved with her, because that name is going to have a big part out to try to connote and hint to what's the person's essence. The pnimiyut of the person, the inner part of the person, that's the way that comes from the Shem. If you really want to understand what is a person's neshama. So look at the two middle letters of the word neshama, nun, shin, mem, hey. The two middle letters, the pnimiyut, the essence of the neshama are the letters shin and mem, the Shem, the name. The Shem tells us what is Sham. It tells us what is there. What is your essence? Tov Shem, Mishem, and Tov. A name is so important. Thus, Shem's name is Shem because he's all about the name. He's all about the essence. He's all about the pnimiyut. He's all about the neshama. When he was trying to cover up his father, he wanted to cover up his father's neshama. That's what bothered him. The Tzelem Elohim, the holiness of his father, that's what was naked right now. He's covering up his father. He's the Shem. He's the pnimiyut. Chazal tell us that what was the greatness of Adam HaRishon? What made Adam HaRishon greater than angels? Why was he so great? Says Chazal, because he was able to name all of the creations, to look and see their pnimiyut, figure out the core essence of every single creation, every bria, and give them their unique individual names. Says the Midrash. This is in Bereshit Rabbah, Perak Yutet, Od Gimel, says the Midrash. Vayechkam mikol ha'adam. And he was the wisest of all the men. It says in Melachim Aleph. What does it mean he was the wisest of kol ha'adam? It's a hint, the wisest of the wisdom of ha'adam, of the original Adam, of Adam HaRishon. Says the Midrash. Adam HaRishon. Menayta chokhmato. What was his chokhmah? What was the wisdom? What was the knowledge? What was the greatness of Adam HaRishon? When God wanted to create man, he went over to the angels. He went to the ministering angels. Amar lahem, na'aseh Adam b'tzalmeinu. He says, let us make man in our image. Amru lefanav, they said to him, Ma enosh ki tizkerenu. They quote a pasuk in Tehillim. What's it worth it? What is this man that you want to remember him? Man is not so great. Man, it's not worth it. Amar lahem, you want to know how great man is? You want to know what he's really worth? Amar lahem, Adam shani rotzeh livrot chokhmato meruba mishelachem. This man that I want to create, this creation, this human being, his wisdom is meruba. It's greater mishelachem. It's greater than yours. Me'asa. What did God do to prove this to them? He brought all the animals, the birds, the wild animals, the domesticated animals, the birds, and he brought it to the angels. Amar lahem, can you tell me what their names are? Can you define what these things are? Lo yadu, they didn't know how to do that. But then when God creates Adam HaRishon, he creates Adam. He says to Adam, he brought all these animals in front of him. He says, can you give me their names? Amar, lazeh na'eh likot shor. He says, this is good to call shor. Velazeh, let's call him an ox. Velazeh ari, we'll call this a lion. Velazeh sus, this is a horse. Velazeh hamor, this is a donkey. Velazeh gamal, this is a camel. Velazeh nesher, this is a vulture. Shne'emar vayikra Adam shemot. This pasuk says that Adam named all of the creations. Amarlo, batama shemecha. And then God asked Adam, what's your name? Amarlo, Adam. My name is Adam. Lama, why? Shinivreti mina Adama. Because Adam is from the language of Adama. I came from the ground. Amarlo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani, ma shemi. And God said, okay, what's my name? Amar lo Hashem, the Ado and the Nai said, you are Hashem, meaning Adam over here seems to be naming God. Lama, Shata Adon al kol ha'briot. Why is that your name? Because you are the Adon, you're the master of all of the creations. Hainu dichtiv, and this is what the pasuk says, Ani Hashem hu shmi, I am God who this is my name. Hu shemi shekarali Adam Rishon, says the Midrash. This is the name that Adam Rishon gave me. Hu shmi sheitaneti beini lebein atzmi. This is the name that I made a deal with myself that I wanted. Hu shmi sheitaneti beini lebein birotai. And this is the name that I stipulated between me and my creations, meaning Adam knew exactly the name that I wanted to call myself. This is the greatness of Adam HaRishon. He knew how to give a name. He knew how to understand the essence of every single creation and define the creation based on their Shem. A few weeks ago, we quoted a Midrash that tells us that when Hashem starts the Torah and ends the Torah, he starts it and ends it with Chesed. It says the Midrash, Hashem is Chesed. We're supposed to be godlike. We're supposed to go Balachta b'dirachab, go in the ways of God. Just like God is Chesed, we're supposed to be Chesed. And says the Midrash, Hashem starts the Torah with Chesed and ends the Torah with Chesed. Where did Hashem start the Torah with Chesed? So it says at the very beginning, he covered up the nakedness of Adam and Chava after they messed up. After the sin of the Etz Hadat, they were naked. They realized they were naked. They realized what was going on right now. So Hashem covers them up. He does this beautiful act of clothing to cover up not only their physical, but spiritually cover them up and make them really feel like a Tzelem Elokim. So who's the first person to mimic Hashem's act of kindness? This initial act of Chesed. Who is the first person in the Torah that we see acts like God, does the godlike act of chesed to cover up somebody's nakedness. It's the story of Shem covering up the nakedness of Noah, his father. Shem, his name is Shem. That's the koach of Adam HaRishon, that Adam HaRishon knows how to give the Shem. He knows how to give names to all of the creation. So now we have his great-great-great-grandson, Shem, whose name is the person's essence. He's the one that's now going to want to cover up his father because he realizes that, oh my God, my father is naked physically, he's also naked spiritually. I have to cover up his soul. So Shem is the essence, it's the soul, and he's therefore zochet to the mitzvah of the tzitzit, which is the physical garment that is elevated to the level of a mitzvah. That's the spiritual clothing, the ruchani clothing, that is the kavod for the soul. Okay, so that is the zechut of Shem. Now we said Yefet, on the other hand, he's from the language of yofi, of external beauty, the body, the chitzoni, the outward. What does he get? What is his zechut? He's zocheh that when the neshama leaves, and what are we left with? The corpse, just the body is left. So his descendants at the end of the days, war, Gog and Magog, whatever that means over there, is zocheh to kvura, to burial. Midah keneged midah. Kvura is the covering of the nakedness of the corpse. After the ruchani neshama leaves, it's the physical covering of the actual body. Okay, so we see that in the same act, the same mitzvah, the kavanah, the intention was so important. Both get big zechuyot, but Shem, who put in the extra effort, gets the spiritual clothing. He's the Shem, the essence, while Yefet only gets the physical external clothing of the burial. Says Rav Feiner that this actually might explain another ayat Tosfot based on two other Gemarot. Says the Gemarot in Menachot Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, as well as in Brachot Yurchet Amud Aleph. There it's discussing a pasuk in Mishlei on the topic of Loeg Larash, and it relates it all to the topic of Tzitzit. Okay, says the pasuk in Mishlei, Loeg Larash Cheref Osehu, a person who mocks the poor. Loeg larash, mocks the poor, mocks the downtrodden, makes fun of the downtrodden, is making fun of his maker. It's sameach le'ed lo yinakeh. He who rejoices over another's misfortune will not go unpunished. So if you mess with the poor, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets upset. Cheref osehu, his maker gets, it's an affront to his maker. Don't degrade the downtrodden. L'halacha, this is explained by the poskim, that when a person goes to a cemetery and he's walking in the cemetery, he can't walk with his tzitzit untucked, his tzitzit out, because that would be the sin of lo'eg larash, making fun of the dead. Because you're going in front of the dead person, you're showing off your tzitzit, and you're saying, "Oh, I can still do mitzvot, but you can't do mitzvot," and that is asur. You got to tuck in your tzitzit when you go to a cemetery. So you're basically telling the dead that I have the mitzvot d'oraita and you don't, and that's ridiculing. That's not allowed. The dead are buried; they can't do mitzvot. Don't make fun of the dead. Now the Rishonim, as well as it seems from the simple pashut of the Gemara and Brachot, it seems to imply this concept of loeg larash applies to other mitzvot as well. But the Tosfot in Nida Daf Samech Aleph Amud Bet Dibor Matchil Aval, he writes, he quotes Rabbeinu Tam that this prohibition applies specifically to tzitzit. That only specifically tzitzit in a cemetery, that's when you have the prohibition. Because says Rabbeinu Tam as follows. He says that since tzitzit, umeferesh Rabbeinu Tam, the dafka shayach loeg larash betzitzit, it's dafka the mitzvah tzitzit that has this prohibition. Mishum deshkula keneged kol mitzvot, because tzitzit is equal to all the mitzvot. We know the famous Rem is tzitzit is gematria 600 plus the 8 strings and the 5 knots. We get to 613. Since tzitzit is equal to all the mitzvot, then you can't wear it in the big farod. It's too much ridicule for the dead. Okay. And Rabbeinu Tam goes on, he says, Mikol makom ma she'anu marim atzmeinu b'fneihem mekayimei mitzvot, this that we show often and that we can do mitzvahs, v'hem einam mitzuvin, kari loeg larash, that's what it means to make fun of the downtrodden. Okay, but as for Rav, we have 7 mitzvahs total, 6 other mitzvot that Chazal tell us are equal to all the mitzvot that are shkulot. So why is it Dafka Rabbeinu Tam saying that it's tzitzit that makes loeg larash? Maybe tefillin should also, that's also a mitzvah that's equal to all the other mitzvot. So why Dafka tzitzit? So he says, Rav Feiner, maybe based on this midrash that Rashi told us about the zechuyot of Shem versus Yefet, maybe this is the hint to why Rabbeinu Tam says it's Dafka, this mitzvah that makes so much fun of the dead. Because what does it mean to ridicule the dead? Not that the mitzvah is so chashuv because it's equal to everything. We have 6 other mitzvot that are very similar. But rather, tzitzit is the epitome of loeg larash because since we are the descendants of Shem, what was Shem's zechut? Shem's zechut was the spiritual clothing, the tzitzit, as opposed to Yefet, who was the external physical clothing of the burial. He's the kvura. Yefet is symbolized by kvura, and Shem is symbolized by tzitzit. So if you walk in a cemetery with your tzitzit out, let's say you're going into a Jewish cemetery, and you're walking about among all the buried Jews whose neshamot have left them, and they're only a body covered by the burial. So when they're covered right now, they're in the world of Yefet. Their zechut is Yefet. So it's a ridicule for a living Jew to say to a dead Jew, "Oh, you're not chayav anymore. I have the mitzvah of Shem. I have the zechut of the ruchni clothing, the tzitzit, while you only have the zechut of the physical chitzoni kvura of Yefet." You can't do that. That's not allowed. To point at him and say, "Oh, you're only like Yefet and we're like Shem," that's not proper. That's loeg larash. That's called the ridiculing of the dead. That might be why, says Rabbi Feiner, or Rabbeinu Tam learns that specifically by tzitzit is what really shows you that contrast between Shem versus Yefet. Okay, so Shem is the first source for the mitzvah of tzitzit, but we have a different Gemara that gives another origin to the mitzvah of the tzitzit. Okay. If we go back to Parashat Lech Lecha, after Avraham Avinu enters the war, the 4 kings versus the 5 kings, and he wins the war, defeats the enemies, he saves his nephew Lot, as well as the king of Sodom. The king of Sodom comes to Avraham to thank him and plead for his life, plead for his wealth and his rechush and his people. At the same time, in the middle of the story, another king shows up. Malchi Tzedek, Melech Shalem, Malchi Tzedek, the king of Shalem, Kohen El Elyon, he's a Kohen, he's a priest to God, and he also comes to Avraham. And Chazal tell us that this Malchi Tzedek is actually Shem ben Noach, and we're going to see now a stark contrast, a difference between the way Avraham treats each of the 2 kings. Okay, so says the pasuk, "Vayetze melech Sodom likrato." The king of Sodom came out to Avraham. Achrei shuvo me'akot et kadra omer v'et hamelachim asher ito. After Avraham defeated those kings, el emek shavehu emek hamelech, he came into the valley of the king. Okay. Umalchi Tzedek. Now in the middle, the Torah takes a break, and a different king comes also. It sounds like all the kings are coming to Avraham to pay homage for reconquering the land of Israel and getting rid of the foreign enemies. Umalchi Tzedek Melech Shalem, Malchi Tzedek, the king of Shalem, which Chazal tells us Yerushalayim. Hotzi lechem v'yain, he brought out a meal, bread, and wine. Behu Kohen El Elyon, and he's a Kohen to the Most High. Vayivarcheu vayomar, and Malchi Tzedek blesses Avraham. Baruch Avraham le'El Elyon koneh shamayim va'aretz, ubaruch El Elyon Hashem migen tzarecha miyadecha. Blessed are you from above high, from Hashem, who Hashem saved you from your enemies. Vayiten lo od ma'aser mikol, and he gave him maaser. Vayomer, not clear who gave to who. And the Vayomer melech Sodom el Avram, tenli and nefesh v'achush kachlach. Now we go back to the Sodom story, and now Sodom tells the king of Sodom tells Avraham, please give me the people and I'll give you all the money. Vayomer Avraham el melech Sodom, harimoti yadi el Adonai el Elyon koneh shamayim v'aretz. I swear to God, I raise my hands to the heavens. In michut ve'ad siroch na'al ve'im mekach mikol shelach ve'lo tomar ani asharti et Avraham. He says, I'm not going to take from a thread, from a chut to a sroch na'al, to a sandal strap. I want none of your money. You take it all. I'm not going to let anybody say that you, the evil king Sodom, made me rich. Now, if you open up the Gemara in Sotah, Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, as well as in Chulin, Daf Pei Tet Amud Aleph, it says that Avraham had a zechut for not taking anything from Melech Sodom. Says the Gemara, Darash Rava, says Rava, Bischar She'amar Avraham Avinu, in the reward, the zechut of Avraham Avinu, the sachar for saying, Im michut be'ad sruch na'al, if I'm not going to take from you, from a thread, from a chut, from a string, to a shoe strap, Zahu banav l'shtei mitzvot. We got 2 mitzvot. Chut shel techelet, the string of the techelet, uretzu'ah shel tefillin, and the strap corresponds to the leather strap of the tefillin. Okay, so now here's the big question. Ask the Mizrahi, ask many of the commentators. He says, if who gave us the talit? Who's zechut? Is it Shem's zechut? Is the talit the zechut of Shem, like we learned in the story back of Shem covering his father Noach? Or is the zechut of the tzitzit come from Avraham by telling the king of Sodom, I don't want your string, I don't want your chut? So what is it? So there's actually different girsas in the Midrashim. If you open up the Tanhuma on Parashat Noach, the Tanhuma really makes it a big stira. The Tanhuma, there seems to be a much bigger issue, because says the Tanhuma, back to our pasuk of Noach, it says, why does it say Vayikach, that only Shem, only on the singular, if it's both Shem and Yefet? We learn, says the Midrash, that Shem was the first one to step it up, to perform the righteous mitzvah, the righteous deed. And then it says, Ma pararam HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how did Hashem reward them? L'shem paralos charo mitzvat techelet tefillin. Interestingly, in this Girsa says over here, and to Shem, he gave him techelet and tefillin. It's funny because it's like the exact same word that Avraham has by us, techelet and tefillin. Shem echaseba. Well, Yefet natanu kvura be'eretz Yisrael, and Yefet gets kvura dafka in Eretz Yisrael. I guess that's the hint to the Gog Magog idea. Okay, so what do we have over here? So according to the Gemara, as well as the Tanhuma, we have ourselves a bit of a stira, because both of them get the techelet string. So who actually gets it? So I saw some want to say that they were both zochet to the techelet, that it was the koch of both of them that brings it into the world. I saw brought down the name of the Baalei a Tosfot as well as the Levush, that Shem was originally the one to be zocher to the techelet, and now the question is which one of the descendants of Shem is going to get the zechut? Because you have to realize we the Jewish people are also Avraham is a descendant of Shem. So by Avraham continuing in the mitzvah by telling Sodom, I don't want your string and your shoe strap, he's now getting the tzitzit and tefillin that originally went to Shem. So the zechut of Shem is being passed down dafka through Avraham and not the other kids of Shem. Now, interestingly enough, we know that I was thinking Lanu Dati, Avraham had a different kid, Yishmael, who's also descendants of Shem and Avraham. And when we have the halachot of the talit and how to wrap in the talit, we learn like Ituf Ishmaelis, one of the few places. Oh, look at the way the Arabs, the Ishmaelim, wrap themselves with their hair coverings, the head coverings. That's how you have to wrap your talit in the morning when you put it on. It's interesting that even Ishmael has some kind of a connection to talit as well. It's the Shem Avraham line. Okay, fine. So when Avraham and Malchit Tzedek meet up, what's taking place is Malchit Tzedek, when he blesses Avraham, he's transferring over the zechut of the tzitzit to Avraham, now the techelet to Avraham as well. Now, I was thinking that we mentioned a few weeks ago in Midrash that Malchit Tzedek was the original Kohen, and that he passed over the kehuna, the Birkat Kohanim, to Avraham, and he made Avraham the next Kohen Gadol. So I was thinking that, we wouldn't know about the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol has a special clothing of a me'il of techelet, this garment of techelet, which in a minute we're going to relate to a different answer to explain the difference between Shem and Avraham. But it could be that, this idea that he's giving over the techelet, he's giving over the kehuna, he's giving over the me'il of the Kohen Gadol is also going to relate to Korach next week parsha as well. We'll get to that at the end of this Dvar Torah. Okay, so that's one answer. One answer is that one answer is that both Shem and Avraham make the zechut together. Answer number two is that Shem originally had the zechut, and now the question is which kid of Shem, and the zechut now goes to Avraham. Another answer that I saw, this was in the Mizrahi, where he's probably basing on a different girsas. He says that Shem was zocher to the white strings, while Avraham was zocher to the techelet strings. We need a different girsa because our Midrashim and Gemara don't seem to go that way. But he says there was white strings versus techelet strings. We actually spoke a couple of years ago. You can ask me, I can PM me for the Divrei Torah about the different teachings of the white versus the techelet. So we can see over here. So he says that Shem was the white strings and Avraham is the techelet. Okay, but Rav Feiner goes with a different approach based on the Midrash Rabbah's version of Shem zechut, as explained by the Kli Yakar. Okay, let's open up the Midrash Rabbah. This is in Perek Lamed Vav Ot Vav. So it says in the pasuk, "Vayikach Shem v'yot simla." Shem and Yefet took the simla. They took the garment. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shem itchil b'mitzvah techila uba Yefet v'nishma lo divichach zacha Shem letalit. He says because Shem was the first one to do it, he was zoche to the talit. Says the Kli Yakar. Look at this midrash. This midrash doesn't say that Shem got the techelet. This midrash says that Shem got the talit, because he's covered his father with a simla, with a garment. Says the Kli Yakar. Perush Rashi, Misham Zachal talit Tzitzit. And also in the Girs of Rashi, it says also talit by Shem, and it says that the strings are by Avraham. So he says, Vikshara M. He says the Mizrahi asked the question that Chazal said, but didn't we learn that it came from the chut comes of the techelet comes from Avraham? So which one is it, Avraham or Shem? There's no problem. Because the merit of covering with the garment, the covering of the garment of Shem was the zechut of the talit, of the garment, the physical four-cornered garment, and the zechut of Avraham saying chut, string, is the zechut of the strings of the tzitzit. Because you can't do the mitzvah of tzitzit, says the Kli Yakar, until you first have the garment, the simla, the talit. So what do we have ourselves? We have a chiluk. We have the talit and we have the strings. So the mitzvah of the talit, of the beged, of the clothing, that is the mitzvah of Shem. That's the zechut of Shem, covering his father with the whole clothing, the whole garment. While the tzitzit, the string part, that's b'zechut Avraham, and it's their joint zechuyot together create the mitzvah of our talit with the strings. Okay. Says Rabbi Feiner, this also might explain another teaching we have in our parasha, that the zechut of tzitzit actually gives us a double shmirah, a double protection. Says the Gemara in Brachot, this is Daf Yud Bet Amud Bet. So he says in the Torah, we're going to see the tzitzit, and it's going to protect us. Remember the mitzvot, and then we're not going to lot turu. We're not going to go astray after our hearts, and after our eyes. Says the Gemara, what does it mean? We're not going to go after our hearts. Zo minut. We're not going to stray after our hearts. It's going to protect us from the foreign gods, from the avodah zarah, from minut, from heresy, from from apikorsiut. And then, we're not going to stray after our eyes. This is going to protect us from thoughts of sin, of gilui arayot, of forbidden relationships, of sexual immorality. So we have this double protection from the prohibition of avodah zarah, of minut, of heresy, and from gilui arayot, from sexual immorality. Okay, now the question is, we know that tzitzit is equal to all the mitzvot, but why dafka these two prohibitions, these two lo ta'ases, these two labin? Why is it dafka these two sins that we get a special protection when it comes from tzitzit? So says Rav Feiner, it's because the joint effort of Shem, joint effort of Shem and Avraham, their zechuyot, their double zechuyot, protect us from these two sins. And he quotes a Meshech Chochma. This is the Meshech Chochma on Parshat Vayera, Perek Kaf Bet, Pasuk Yud Dalet. Says the Meshech Chochma. Now, Chazal tell us this is not the only time that Avraham and Shem get together is with the story of Avraham and Melchizedek when they meet around the time of Sodom and the Tzitzit. But there's actually another connection point between Avraham and Shem, another joining together of the two of them. This is based on Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah, Perek Nunvav, Pasuk Ot Yud. Says the Midrash, Vayikra Avraham Shem HaMakom Adonai Yireh. We're now speaking about Yerushalayim. Where did Yerushalayim get its name from? So it says when Avraham came to the Akedah, when he's doing the Akedah on the Temple Mount in Yerushalayim, Avraham called the place Hashem Yireh, that Hashem sees. Shem karaoto Shalem. And Shem, who Chazal tells us Melchizedek, he called the city of Yerushalayim Shalem, the place of shlemut, of completeness. Shnei Amaru Melchizedek Melech Shalem, as the pasuk said, we have Melchizedek, the king of Shalem. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. Im koreani oto yireh kishem shekara to Avraham, says God, if I call Yerushalayim Yireh, the way Avraham called it, Shem Adam Tzaddik Mitraem. Shem, who was a tzaddik, is going to complain. He's going to get angry at me. V'im koreh ani oto Shalem. And if I call the city Shalem, the way Shem called it, Avraham Adam Tzaddik Mitraem. Then Avraham the tzaddik, he's going to get angry at me. He's going to complain. Ela hareini koreh oto Yerushalayim k'mo shekru shnehem. So therefore, God says, I'm going to call it Yerushalayim. I'm going to join the two together. Yireh Shalem. You see the fullness, the completion, the coming together. I'm going to call it Yerushalayim based on the joining together of the name Avraham, Yireh, and the name of Shem, Shalem. Okay, beautiful. So the Avraham and Shem create the name Yerushalayim. Now, the Yefet Torah actually explains. He says, "V'kdim Shem shel Avraham, the Shem shel Shem mishum de Avraham tzaddik tfei mishem." He says, "Okay, why is it called Yerushalayim and not Shalem Yeru? Why does Avraham's name comes first? It's because Avram was a bigger tzaddik than Shem. V'gam ki hakeuna natla mishem and natla Avraham." And also based on a different midrash, he quotes down that Shem had lost the Keonah, or he transferred the Kohen Gadol over to Avraham. So now when Avraham becomes the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Kodem, the Kol Davav Shukdusha, we know Kohen gets the first Aliyah, he leads the benching, the Kohen always goes first when it comes to holy things. So therefore Avraham will become the new Kohen Gadol, his name comes first, so therefore the Yeru comes before the Shalem, and explains the Matonot Keonah in this Midrash. Why is it Yerushalayim and not Yireh? Shalem. He says because Yireh is gematria, is gematria of Re'u, meaning if you take Yireh and you take the last two letters, the Aleph is 1 and the Hey is 5, you change that over into a Vav and that becomes Yiru. So Yireh becomes Yiru when you put it together, and that's the Yiru Shalem, and that brings it together. And then the next question is, why is it called Yerushalayim and not Yerushalem? Although if you actually look at the Nach and Nevi'im, almost always Yerushalayim is spelled Yerushalem. We pronounce it Yerushalayim, but the actual the Ketiv, the way it's written, is Yerushalem. So I saw brought down that the Yerushalayim you find 667 times in Tanakh, 641 times they're in Hebrew, 26 times they're in Aramaic. Of those 641 times that they're in Lashon Kodesh, that they're in Hebrew, 5 of those times they're spelled with a Yud, Yerushalayim, and every other time it's spelled without the Yud. It's spelled Yerushalem. So the question is, why is it spelled Yerushalem? Why is the Ketiv Shalem? So I said, that's the Zechut of Shem, because Melchizedek called it Shalem. So we write it as Shalem, the way he said it, and that's why there's no Yud in there. But then I saw a different approach that we know that Yerushalayim, the Im makes it plural, because there's really 2 Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim Ir Shechubra La Yachdav. Yerushalayim is connected to a Yerushalayim Shel Mala. It's connected to Yerushalayim in the heavens as well. So we have ourselves Yerushalayim down below, and we have ourselves our Yerushalayim up in the heaven. Says Rabbeinu Bechaya, this is in Bamidbar Perek Yutet Pasuk Yud Gimel, the Ot Yud Shechaser, the Yud that's missing, and most of the times that it says Yerushalayim, Hu Beit HaMikdash Shel Mala. That's the Beit HaMikdash in the Shamayim, Shehi Achorona Shebashem, which corresponds to the last letter Hey in God's name. B'lechach nimtza Hey Yerushalayim Elaim, and that's why there's 5 times Gematria Hey, where Yerushalayim is spelled with the Yud, B'mikra in the Torah, L'Yirmos Ki HaHei Chubra La B'zman HaShlemut, to tell you that the Hey of HaKadosh Baruch was reconnected to Yerushalayim in the times of the full Shlemut, whatever that exactly means. Okay. So now comes along the Meshech Chochmah and he says, oh, Shem and Avraham got together, Yerushalem, made Yerushalayim. They made the Kedusha of Yerushalayim. So he understands, though, that each one brought a special aspect of Zechut to the city of Yerushalayim, understood a very specific idea of what Yerushalayim and what mitzvot are really all about. Okay, explains the Meshech Chochmah. V'ainyan, the Shem haya bedor mabul. He says that Shem was in the generation of the flood. V'aya b'teva, he was in the ark. V'zan upirnes kol hanivraim, and he did massive chesed. He fed all the creations. Sham b'teva, inside the teva. Vayikar היה לתקן המידות והפעולות שהם היו מושחתים, שהשחית כל בשר דקו מן הארץ חמאס, וכל לימודו היה לתקן המידות והתכונות בכל חי. And what was the biggest avodah that he was trying to do with himself and with the animals? The biggest job of Shem was to fix the midot. He said, because why was the world destroyed? The world was destroyed because the sin of the Mabul, that generation of the flood, was ben adam l'chavero. They were evil to each other. There was Hamas. So his whole teaching was to fix the midot. But then he go on, we'll skip a little bit. Avraham, what was Avraham's midah? Avraham hitpalsef. He was the philosopher. Me'od b'chokhmah. He was always thinking philosophy about when it comes to wisdom. V'limed kol darkei hatoim v'tvakechem, and he fought with everybody, taught everybody, all those that had gone astray in the world. V'chakar b'sichlo ki yesh Hashem echad mashkiach al hakol v'lo masar shkachato le'akochavim. He was talking about one God, monotheism, and that Hashem has hashkacha, that he still relates to this world, he's still mashkiach on the world, he's still involved in this world. Okay. So Shem was metaken the ben adam l'chavero, while Avraham, the midot, while Avraham was metaken the ben adam l'makom, the emunah HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says Rafiner, let's borrow this Meshech Chochmah. The first time Shem and Avraham get together, Yerushalayim, he explains to Meshech Chochmah that Shem is bringing together, is fixing Ben Adam L'Chavero, Avraham is fixing Ben Adam L'Makom. Let's take that back to our Talit and our Tzitzit. So he says, Avraham Avinu was the first philosopher. He was the Rosh Emunah. He reintroduced monotheism into the world and spread it beyond the walls of the Yeshivat Shem Ba'ever to the world. Shem kept it in the yeshiva, but Avraham spread it out to the rest of the world. He's the one who physically destroys the idols, the literal iconoclast. He breaks the idols of his father. He's the one in Old Mishrim explaining to the world that God still reacts, God is still around, that there's a burning palace in the world, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is still here, and he's still with us. Thus, when Avraham calls the Makom of the Akedah Yerushalayim, Hashem Yireh, his idea is the Yireh. Hashem sees. Hashem is Mashkiach Tmidi. He's always looking. He's always watching. He's still around. He didn't forget about us. Hashem is the omnipotent. He's the omnipresent. Hashem is always around. That's Avraham, the philosopher. His essence that he spreads to the world, to all the converts, tries to change the world, spread it out to the world. Hashem is watching over us all the time. Hashem Yireh. Hashem is always watching. It says in Shira Shirim, Hashem is Metzitz min hacharakim. Hashem Metzitz. He peers out. He's looking through the lattice work. Hashem is peering, trying to see this. Metzitz means to see, like Yireh, to see. Metzitz is the language of Tzitzit. The strings, the Tzitziyot, they are B'schut Avraham, who protects us against Minut, protects us against heresy, about Emunah Hashem. He's against Avodah Zarah. That's the Metzitz. Or Item Oto, Re'iyah. Look at the strings. Oto, look at the strings. That's the Koch of Avraham. Avraham Hashem Yireh. And what about Shem? Shem calls Yerushalayim Shalem. What is Shalem? Malchit Tzedek Melech Shalem. Shalem usually highlights midot, how to be awesome. Ben Adam L'Chavero. What do we know about Aharon HaKohen? Lemnu Dati Aharon HaKohen is Ohev Shalom, Odev Shalom. It's all about the midot, making peace amongst the people, to not cheat on our friends, to not steal, to not do gezel, to not steal wives, promiscuity, depravity. What was the sin of Dor Mabul? What was the sin of Shem's generation? It was Hamas. It was stealing the married women. It was Arayot. It was Gilui Arayot. That was the sin of the destruction of Shem Ben Adam L'Chavero. Says the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Daf Lamed Vav Amud Bet. Zenut Nami Beitino Shel Shem Gazeru. You want to know who made the laws against Gilui Arayot? You want to know who fought against sexual immorality? It was Shem. Shem was the Av Beidin, says the Gemara in the case of Yehuda and Tamar. That's the koach of Shem. Shem in the Tzitzit, in the Talit, is the one that protects Einechem from Gilui Arayot. Shalem also hints to the idea of Shlemut. What's the ultimate Shlemut according to Chazal? The ultimate Shlemut comes from a husband and wife who come together. A husband and wife coming together is the antithesis of Gilui Arayot. As the Gemara in Brachot tells us, that what does a marriage do? A marriage begins to rebuild the ruins of Yerushalayim, brings it back together, brings the Shlemut back to Yerushalayim. What do we know about a marriage? There's actually a three-way connection. We have the Ish, the Isha, and the Yud and the Kei. The Hashem is in the middle of it. We have ourselves Hashem, Ish, and Isha. You have the Ben Adam Chavero and the Ben Adam Makom all coming together, and that's why the Chatan and Kala in their Shlemut is the beginning of the rebuilding of Yerushalayim, creating that Yerushalem coming together, that joining together. Okay, so just like Avraham and Shem create the Yerushalayim, the Yirah, the philosophy of Hashem seeing us, the Metzitz, the Tzitziot, the strings, with the No Avodah Zarah, together with the Shalem, with the full Midot of the Koach of Shem, says Rav Feiner, so too by the Tzitzit. We have ourselves the beged, the talit itself, the actual clothing, the four corners. That's going to be the koach of Shem. That covers up the nakedness of Noach. That's the koach of Shem who fights against Gilui Arayot. That's the spiritual clothing to cover up the actual physical nakedness. That's the acharei enechem. That's the one that protects us against the Gilui Arayot. And I think there's no coincidence that who's the first Kohen Gadol in the world? It's Malchi Tzedek. He's the Kohen El Elyon. He's the Kohen Gadol with the special garments, the 8 special garments, the clothing, including the Me'il of the Tekhelet. The garments are all about the covering of the physical with the spiritual. That is Shem. Similarly, we have another guy in the Torah that's all about the coats, all about the Me'ilim. We have the holy Yosef HaTzadik. What do we know about Yosef? Yosef was the one that was able to control his Re'iyah. He's control his sight. He's not going to gaze at Eshet Potifar. He's not going to do znut. No Gilu Arayot when it comes to Yosef HaTzadik. We even mentioned a couple months ago a Midrash that says that Eshet Potifar got so angry, she placed like this whole metal on his neck that was very painful, so he had to look at her all the time. And because he knew how to control his sight. And because he was able to control his sight, he was able to control his Re'iyah. Therefore, we know about Yosef, there's no Ayin Hara Sholet on Yosef. Yosef is above the Ayin Hara. He knew what to see and what not to see. Therefore, Ayin Hara has no power against Yosef. Says Rav Feiner, quoting an unbelievable Rav Shlomo Kluger in Chochmat Torah. Says Rav Kluger on Parashat Vayeshev. The Gemara in Menachot Mem Daled Amud Aleph tells us a story about a certain man, Maaseh B'Adam Echad, who heard about a certain zona, a certain prostitute who was on the other side of the ocean. And he paid a fortune of money to get to her. And ultimately, he was about to be intimate with her, but as he was climbing up the mattress to get to her, his tzitzit came undone and they smacked him in the face. And the tzitzit saved him from sinning. This was a person who tzitzit was a very important mitzvah for him. The tzitzit saved him. Tzitzit is keneged acharei enechem. It protects us from the zanut. Said the Arizal in Sefer Likutim, Parashat Vayishlach, Siman Lamed Chet, she'otot tzadik haya nitzot Yosef HaTzadik. Who was this guy in the Gemara who was saved? There was a certain spark of Yosef HaTzadik inside of him. V'ota zona, and the prostitute in that story in the Gemara, hayta nitzot shel Eshet Potifar. That was Eshet Potifar. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Says Rav Kluger, go to the end of Parashat Vayeshev. Vayi kayom hazeh, Eshet Potifar tried to seduce Yosef every single day. But then there was that one day when nobody was around. Vayavo habayta lasot melachto, and Yosef came to do his work for the day. Ve'ein ish me'anshei habayit sham babayit, and nobody else was there. V'titpasel bebigdo, and she grabs onto his garment, lemor, shikra imi, lie with me. Vayazov bigdo biyada, and he leaves his garment in her hand. Vayanos vayatzeh chutza, and he runs away. Vayikir ota ki azav bigdo biyada, and when she saw that the beged was in her hand, vayanas chutza, and he had fled outside. That's when she goes and screams to everybody, "Oh my God, he tried to rape me." What beged did she grab onto? Says Rav Kluger, Eshet Potifar grabs Yosef's talit. As long as Yosef wears his talit, he's protected from zanut. And Eshet Potifar knows this. So she grabs away his tzitzit. She grabs the talit, the garment, the koach of Shem. She grabs the beged, the simla. Once she has it, he loses his protection. And he has to run away. He says, I don't have tzitzit anymore. What's going to protect me? And now that she's holding the tzitzit in her hands, she could go to everybody else and say, "Oh, look at him. He left his tzitzit in my hand. He doesn't want protection anymore. He wanted to sleep with me. He wanted the zenut." And that was the Eshet Potifar grabbing on the tzitzit of Yosef. And therefore, says this Arizal, that they come back and these nitzotzot, these sparks come back in future generations in times of Gemara. And we have the tikkun of Eshet Potifar as the zona, and that Adam being Yosef, and the tzitzit protecting them. And then ultimately the story ends off that she converts, they end up together, b'kedusha, and there's a whole tikkun, because we know Chazal tell us that Eshet Potifar had certain good covenant as well. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to our Kli Yakar. So we said that the talit, the actual beged, the clothing part of it, that corresponds to the zechut of Shem. Shem covered his father's nakedness. That's a zechut that protects us from einechem, from gilui arayot, from sexual immorality. And then come along the strings. The strings is the koach of Avraham, Hashem yireh, the emunah HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Hashem is always around. We know the famous Gemara in Menachot that the techelet string is supposed to take us all the way up to the Shamayim, up to the Kisei HaKavod, all the way to Hashem. It's our protection against Avodah Zarah, to recognize that Hashem is in this world, emunah, and Hashem is still around, and Hashem is always next to us. This also explains an interesting halacha. Says the Magen Avraham in Siman Kaf Hey, he writes that that a person should go out and buy a talit na'eh. Go buy a beautiful garment of talit. Why? Because of zeh keli vanveh. We have a mitzvah to beautify the mitzvot. So we also find it in Rashi as well. Rashi Vavakamat of Tet Amud Bet. He says, you want an example of hidur mitzvah, to make a mitzvah more beautiful? Go buy a talit na'eh. Go buy a nice talit. But ask many of the achronim, they say, I don't understand though. Who cares about the beged? Who cares about the talit? It's the strings that's the mitzvah. Without the strings, you got nothing. So we should go out and buy the best strings possible. But who cares about the actual beged? But says Rav Feiner, according to Rav Steinberg and others as well, that once you add the tzitzit to the beged itself gets kedusha. Once you say, I want to make a special talit for a mitzvah, we see that's Avraham coming together with Shem. So Shem's talit has a kedusha as well. We see from the Midrash, the talit was a chut of Shem. Now we know it's not a mitzvah until Avraham comes along and adds the strings to it. But once you add the strings to it, you have yourself a kedusha in the beged as well. This might also explain there's a halacha that a person shouldn't walk into the bathroom with a talit on top of his clothing, because again, there's kedusha to the beged once the strings have been added on. Okay, so what is it we're saying about Avraham? That Avraham has the ability to take the koach of Shem. Avraham can take Shem's power and take it to the next level, kick it up a notch. Similarly, what do we know about Shem? Shem was the first one to teach Torah, Yeshivat Shem Va'ever. But we know that Chazal tells us that the 2,000 year period of Torah, the era of Torah, doesn't start with Shem. It starts years later with Avraham. Why don't we count Torah from Shem? Shem had a yeshiva. Why? So they explain Chazal, because Avraham was the first one to actually teach Torah to the world. He spread it outside of the Daled Amot of the yeshiva, spreading Hashem to everybody, teaching the Torah, teaching monotheism, teaching it out there, getting out of the yeshiva. And that becomes the koach of what it is to be a Jew, to spread this teaching of Hashem, not keeping it just in the walls of Shem. Shem's place was great. Avraham even learned in the yeshiva of Shem. But ultimately, what it is to be a Jew is to take it out there and take it further. We know the standard minhag of the Ashkenazim is to tuck the beged under the clothing and reveal the strings. We know the Hasidim wear it out, Svaradim tuck the strings in, but everybody agrees that Oritim Oto goes primarily, to see the tzitzit, goes primarily on the strings themselves. Why? Because that's the koach of Avraham, of Hashem Yireh. We look at the tzitzit, remember that Hashem sees us, that Hashem is part of the world. The strings are the avodah of Avraham, of spreading the message of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world. And says Rav Feiner, one last idea, this might also explain why the mitzvah of tzitzit is in our parsha, at the very end of the parsha, in the maftir, and it's right between the two sins of the chet meraglim, the sin of the spies, at the start of our parsha, and the sin of Korach at the start of next week's parsha. Our mitzvah of the tzitzit might be a bridge to these two sins. Why? Because what was the sin of the spies? Okay, so our parsha started off, Shlach lecha anashim vayatur et eretz Canaan. I go send out the spies to go latur, to go vayatur, to go scope out the land. This language of vayaturu, to check out the land, is the same language we find in the mitzvah tzitzit. Velo taturu acharei lebechem, that don't go astray after your hearts and after your eyes. The same language of latur, taturu. There's some kind of tikkun taking place with the tzitzit and the sin of the spies. What was the sin of the spies? They went to the land of Israel, they saw the land, and they saw how great it was, how awesome it was, the fruits of the land, but then they got scared. They didn't think that Hashem was with them. They didn't think they'd be able to conquer it. But how could they not realize that? Hashem is there for you. Hashem said, I'll help you conquer. This was a sin, ben adam makom. This was a sin of not believing that God was still with them, that God would still intervene with them. That's the sin of the strings. That's the sin of Avraham, Abraham's chelak in the mitzvah of ben adam makom, of believing in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem was saying, go look at Yerushalem, open up your eyes, see how perfect everything is. Why are you misreading things? Why are you misunderstanding things? They kept saying that the giants in their eyes made them look small. This concept of eyes and seeing and positioning. This is the sin of challenging Hashem. Ben adam makom, that Hashem is not going to protect me. There's many other perushim connecting the language of the mitzvah of tzitzit and the language of the chet meraglim, and how the tzitzit is metaken their sin. Laniyut dati, I was thinking, We also had in last week's parasha that Moshe Rabbeinu tells his father-in-law Yitro, he says, Yitro, please don't leave us. You have this great ability to lead us to the desert. Now why do we need spies? Maybe we needed spies because according to one opinion, maybe Yitro left, maybe Yitro stayed, maybe he left, maybe he came back. Not so clear, but maybe maybe Moshe was saying, we need a Yitro who could help us out, or maybe some said the sin was that Moshe was relying too much on Yitro. He should have relied on a Kadosh Baruch Hu to be our guide. But I heard once from Rabbi Khan, he says, look at the name Yitro. Yitro is the same language of Latur. Yitro, the Tur. Again, the seeing, this being able to guide someone. Moshe tells Yitro, don't leave us. Vayomer, al na tazov otanu. Please don't leave us. Ki al ken yadata achanotenu b'midbar. Because you know how we should camp in the desert. Vayita lanu le'enayim. You're going to be our eyes. Again, Oritamoto, back to the eyes. Hashem Yir'eh. I was thinking, Nudati, what do we know about Yitro? Yitro is also a Kohen. He's also a person at one point, he was Kohen Midian at one point in his life. He's also the person who tried out every single Avodah Zarah and rejected everything for Hashem. That's similar to the Avraham Avinu stories of fighting against the Avodah Zarah, the koch of the strings of recognizing who's the Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's exactly who Yitro was, the one who tried out all the Avodah Zarah and rejected the Avodah Zarah. He's the person of the Emunah Hashem. So the sin of the spies is minut. It's the heresy of the Avodah Zarah. It's the heresy of lo taturu acharei levavchem. And what's the next sin? The next sin is the start of next week's parasha. The next sin is Korach's rebellion. What's Korach's rebellion all about? So Korach's rebellion is a sin in the beged. It's a sin in the talit itself. It's the sin of not learning from the story of Shem, of bin Adam lechavero. Because what was Korach's rebellion? It was a populist rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu. It says that the Korach came to Moshe in the Midrash. He said, Moshe, a talit shekulo techelet. Chazal already connect the techelet to the story of Korach. He says, if I bring you a beged of techelet, if I give you a talit, just the clothing, just a four-cornered garment without strings, no strings at all, just a beged, shouldn't it be kosher? So if you actually look further, it says that Korach and his people were very noble people. The Torah calls them Anshe Shem, people of great stature. But maybe we can read it literally. Anshe Shem. They're the people of Shem. They are the beged people, the talitot. The Anshe Shem, that's the beged shekulo techelet minus the strings. The strings comes from Avraham Avinu. The Anshe Shem are just the techelet, are just the beged people. But they messed up because they didn't learn the lesson of Shem. Because Shem is not ben adam makom. Shem is ben adam chavero, and they made the mistake of thinking we can just do ben adam makom and put that in the beged itself. We know that the other midrashim also tell us that Korach and his people accused Moshe Rabbeinu of chas v'chalila, of gilui arayot, of sleeping with the married women. That's why the women love Moshe so much. That's why they never sinned. So we see over here also this concept of the beged, of the Shem, of being anti-gilui arayot. That's also behind the scenes in the midrashim right now. But what was the issue over here? The issue of Korach's rebellion was not ben adam makom. They said, Kulam Kedoshim, we're all holy, we all love God, we want to be all techelet, we all recognize Hashem, there's no question. They were just saying, we don't need a hierarchy. We're all so close to God that society, we don't need Ben Adam Chavero. We could just be all in the Shamayim, all in the Kisei HaKavod, all in the heavens, all techelet. But this is a rebellion against Ben Adam Chavero, because it's all about really kavod. It's a breakdown of society. You're challenging the authority and leadership of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Aaron HaKohen. This is a breakdown in Ben Adam Chavero. To say we don't need Ben Adam Chavero is the biggest way to destroy Ben Adam Chavero. To say that we don't need a beged and strings, we only need a beged. We don't need strings at all. We don't need the joining together of Ben Adam Chavero and Ben Adam Makom. That's not the way the world works. We can't make the whole beged the string. We can't get rid of the strings. We can't only have Hashem. We have to have both. And that might explain, says Refiner, why the maftir of Tzitzit is the bridge between the chet HaMeraglim, which was a sin, Ben Adam Makom, and the chet of Korach, which was a sin of Ben Adam Chavero, to tell us that you want a protection. Lo tatu acharei levavchem v'chei nechem. You want a protection against heresy, and you want a protection against gilui arayot. You want a protection of Ben Adam Chavero and Ben Adam Makom. Then you have to have yourself the koach of both Avraham and Shem together. You have to have the greatness of Yerushalayim, the Yir'eh and the Shalem all coming together. Shabbat Shalom.